with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Let your continual mercy, O Lord, cleanse and defend your church. And because it cannot continue in safety without your help, protect and govern it always by your goodness. Gracious God, we pray for the Holy Catholic Church. Fill it with all truth, and all truth with all peace. Where it is corrupt, purify it. Where it is in error, direct it. Where in anything it is amiss, reform it. Where it is right, strengthen it. Where it is in want, provide for it. Where it is divided, reunite it. For the sake of Jesus Christ, your Son, our Savior. Amen.
Amen.
So, to talk about the governance of the Episcopal Church. And so how we're governed. Just a little bit about my background. For 16 years, as I mentioned, I've been an Episcopal priest. And before coming here to St. Luke's, I served, well, I taught for 25 years college and seminary. And I prefer college teaching. And I served as priest for youth and family ministries at All Saints Episcopal Church in Glen Rock, New Jersey. So I did that while I was teaching at General Theological Seminary. So I taught at 2 Episcopal seminaries, one in Evanston, Chicago, Seabury Western Seminary, which is named after our first bishop, Samuel Seabury. And then I taught at General Theological Seminary in Manhattan for 4 years, and 6 years I taught at the Episcopal Seminary in Chicago, Evanston. And then I did 2 years at All Saints. And so today I'm going to talk with you about a little bit about the structure and the government of our church. And so first I would like to start with a question, just to kind of get us into it. Would you say that we are a hierarchical or a democratic church? How many think we're a hierarchical church? Show of hands. How many think we're a democratic church?
I think you can make a case for both a little bit. I think one is more stronger than the other.
Okay, how many think both?
Well done.
Was that? Okay, so yeah. So everybody's right. Because we are hierarchical, we're democratic, and we're a little of both, as Liz pointed out. And so the way we are hierarchical, Episcopal means bishop. So we do have a certain order that we respond. Just for example, everyone cannot read the gospel during service, worship. Who knows who can read the gospel? Who are the only people who can read the gospel? According to the rubrics, the rules of the church.
I'm such a hand raiser when I know the answer, I'm going to stop.
Okay, yeah, you don't count.
I can assign it, I know.
Anyone want to take a stab at it? The deacon? Or, so clergy.
Okay, yeah.
Right, so that's good. So most times if you have a deacon, we don't have a deacon, a vocational deacon. Elizabeth, Ed, and I serve as deacons. So you will see sometimes deacon on the bulletin, but we're all priests. But we're all clergy. So deacons are clergy as well as priests, presbyters. We're also called. So the lay people in the Episcopal Church can't read the gospel. And that is not, we come out of the Church of England, our structure, and in the Church of England, lay people can because they make the change. And this comes from the Roman Catholic Church, so a little bit of history here. So the way that there's a process if that were to be changed, and it's not something I'm in favor of. I think everyone should be able to read the gospel. But that is the structure that we have now, and that's the hierarchical part, which says just not anyone can just read the gospel. Only reserved for clergy. Where we're democratic is that lay people have a voice and a vote in the Episcopal Church, which is why, unlike the Roman Catholic Church, where it is strictly hierarchical, in the Episcopal Church, we've been able to make changes because we have lay people involved and they have given voice to bring about change. So if you have Catholic friends, some of them probably, they're pretty liberal. You run into Catholics that are pretty liberal and you wonder, why is it that women can't be ordained in the Catholic Church? Or why do they have attitudes around LGBT issues and still? And that's because of this hierarchy of older, really older men who are pretty intransigent in their views, and it doesn't allow for change. So that's one difference in the structure and the governance of the two denominations. So I'm going to say a few things about where we find our rules in our constitutions and canons. So this is where we find what we believe and how we have decided how we're going to govern. And I'll talk about it in three ways. First, I want to talk about it at the congregational level. So let's talk about St. Luke's. So the head of this current parish is Ed Baker. He is an interim rector. So the name of the leader of an Episcopal parish or church is called the rector. So we don't have a permanent rector. Soon we will have a permanent rector. It's been a long time. So Ed is the interim rector. When Ed leaves, so there'll be a period where he will leave before the new rector comes, before she or he comes. Who would you think would then be next in charge when Ed leaves?
I guess like you're doing Elizabeth there.
That's the logical response. Good. But it's not so. The senior warden. In this case, yes, Melba Hughes would be in charge. A layperson.
Yeah, y'all know that the senior warden means they're the head of the vestry, like the figurehead of the
Yeah.
vestry. We haven't really done, I assume you know that, but we
Okay,
haven't
and I'll
really
say
covered
something
that.
about the vestry.
Right.
So that's a good place to go now. So the vestry is comprised in currently our composition 12 members. And typically it's going to be about 12, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, depending on the size of the congregation. And there are two we call senior warden and the junior warden. The senior warden is the person who is in charge of kind of the leadership and how things are run. The junior warden is in charge of buildings and grounds. That's typically those are the roles. And this is, I was told the first time where we have two women who are, where did Kate go?
And she left early.
She's not in the class.
Oh, okay, so Kate's mom is junior warden and Melba Hughes is the senior. So we have two women. And just a sad note in the history.
Say that again. This is the first time in this church is history.
In the history, and it's,
I thought that was crazy.
yes.
Coming from a different church background, like that's crazy.
Well, I'm going to talk about it in a little bit about when women were allowed to be ordained within some of our lifetime, who's sitting around this circle, and talk about how that actually was able to change through the process we're going to talk about. So the congregation, so the leadership, you have the rector, and then you have associate priests, and then you have the rest of the congregation. And so we have the vestry, and they are so that's the body that's voted on, and they represent the people, the congregation. So that's a little bit of the structure of the congregation. As I said, when there is no rector, the senior warden fills that position. When Jan Matthews, our former rector, left, for that period before Ed came, Scott Inman, who was the senior warden at the time, was in charge. So that's how it's, and those are the canons of the church. So the diocese, so the congregation is comprised of this community. And then we have a diocese, which is comprised of a region. So it's a region of the Episcopal Church. And we have about 114 congregations in the Diocese of Atlanta, which is Middle and North Georgia. So we have a person who is the head of the diocese, and that person is, who is our bishop. So he is the diocesan bishop. There are some dioceses where they will have another bishop called a suffragan bishop, and sometimes they do an assistant bishop, or that's just assisting but was not elected. But the suffragan is an elected position. So there is a vote. We'll talk about voting on how bishops are elected in just a minute, in just a little bit. So the diocese is the region, and it's set up similar to how the church structure is. You have the rector, you have the vestry, and then you have the congregation. So here you have the bishop, and then you have those who are other priests or rectors of the diocese. They would be governing bodies of those different parishes, and the bishop is the pastor for the priests and really the parishes, as the rector would be for just that one parish. So that's a little bit, so you can see the similarities in the two structures. And then we have General Convention, which is our national and international body that meets it's a triennial meeting. Every 3 years we meet, and we meet in different cities, and that's dioceses from across the country and actually outside come together, and we have about 100 dioceses in the country.
For those of you who were in previous customs, when we talk about the kids going, that's EYE. Is that's the youth.
Okay.
When the youth go to participate, it's called EYE. And then the provincial one is PYE.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So they know that connection.
Yeah.
So in General Convention, so we talk about delegates. Let me just talk about every year. So every year we have an annual meeting. And at the annual meeting, we vote on people to go into the vestry. Some people come up, some people go on. And we also discuss our budget and all those matters. And that's where people have a voice in what's going on. There's a presentation, different things are brought up in the annual meeting. There is the diocesan meeting that happens every year as well. So delegates are sent, so we have representatives from each parish who represent their church, and they go and they sit and they participate in the business of the diocese. And resolutions are entered and voted on. And a resolution is if the people have decided that they want to bring something forward to be voted on to shift the church to do that practice. And unlike strictly congregational denominations, like congregation, like Baptist, where it's local autonomy. So they decide just within their church. In the Episcopal Church, since we are, in that case, not just congregational, but we're also hierarchical, we are expected to follow what is decided on at the national level, or in this case, the regional level. So there are some canons that we would say, canons, local canons, and then there are some national canons. And we're expected to follow those and to be, because there's a sense of being in order and obeying what is put forth. And a couple of really controversial issues that have come up of late: women's ordination and LGBT marriage that happened. And I came into the church in the sort of really in the heat of women's ordination had already happened, because I'm not that old. But LGBT issues were going on, ordination and marriage, same-gender marriage. And I remember, and Liz can remember too, there were just people going to the mic, and there were some really, really awful things that were happening. Some people said in opposition. And it got really, really acrimonious at times.
The first time I was at youth, and I got to go to EYE, so I was a junior. And we went and...
So lay people, in fact, is comprised mostly of lay people.
Y'all would be doing this if we weren't in lockdown.
Yes. So every diocese is expected to have 4 delegates to represent, 4 delegates, and then 4 lay people, and then 4 priests to be delegates at the general convention. And so that's about 800 folks that are coming, representing all the dioceses of the country.
And I think youth-wise we can stand too, but we're not under the...
Yeah, and then there are alternate delegates as well. So, and then there's a youth track or category. Yes. So that all parts of the church are represented. That's the democratic part of the Episcopal Church, which I think is so cool. So I've set up this structure, and someone tell me what this structure reminds you of as far as government. Yes. So a little bit about the Episcopal Church, and I'm sorry we don't have a lot of time to go into the history, but we come out of the Church of England, and you know a little bit about history. Henry VIII, he wanted to get a divorce, and so there was a movement. So you've done that. Okay, all right, great. So then you know about how there is a close tie with the civil and the religious. And so just one example. When I officiate a wedding, I sign the marriage certificate or the license. It is the only part of the law where my signature actually carries weight and I become a civil authority. And that's a carryover from England because of the tie between civil and religious. And that's created, of course, particularly around gay marriage, quote unquote. That created a lot of struggle and controversy because of that tie, even though the church is a separation of church and state. But that in that way is coupled. So some people wondered whether they would be required to do it, but you don't have to do any wedding if you don't want to do it. I have that right. If a couple came to me and because I didn't feel they were ready or whatever, I could say I don't want to do it. So it was never the case, but because of some people who were really opposed to it, they tried to use that as a way to trash it or to sink it. So Catherine is exactly right. So in our government, we have the House of Representatives, and we have the Senate, and then we have the President. So this structure, and when you think about a lot of our forefathers, those were men who decided, they were Episcopalian. So the model in our government is really very similar to the structure of the church. So the House of Deputies is comprised of lay people and priests. And then there's the House of Bishops. And the presiding bishop is the president of the House of Bishops, obviously. And then there's a president, a layperson or a clergy person who is the president of the House of Deputies. And so that's the combination. Liz, did you have a question?
No, I was like, yeah, I love it. And look, there's the Horace at the top.
Oh no, that is not me. That is the most reverend, and that's the title. There's only one person. We don't have a pope. But this person is the leader of our church, whoever is the presiding bishop. And the current presiding bishop is the most reverend Michael B. Kerr. And he kind of looks like him. That is actually Desmond Tutu. It's a Desmond Tutu dog. But I thought, okay, I can just, he'll fill in for him. So that's a little bit about that structure there. And so when there is a resolution that is being brought forth to be voted on, the resolution has to be put forth in there. All these things are put in writing. There is a process of bringing a resolution. These are things that someone is bringing forth or a church is bringing forth to be voted on for change or to be added. And it has to have at least 2 other endorsers for it to go forth, and this is at the committee level. And then it has to pass in both houses before it goes to the floor of the convention. So when you hear about resolutions, that there's a period of resolutions, and that's when a resolution is presented, and then people can go to the mic, either for or against. And there is a line, and Liz has talked about, they gave an example of people going to the mic to speak for the resolution or to speak against it. And after, someone can call for the conversation to end and for us to vote. And sometimes it just, you don't have a lot of opposition, or it's just people are there, and then there's a vote, and then there's a vote by the body. The voting members, all clergy are voting members who are part of the diocese, or if they are part of a diocese, they certainly are part of the General Convention. And of course, all delegates, lay people, lay delegates would vote as well. And so that's how things are passed in the church. And once it becomes approved, then it is to be recognized and followed in the church. So let's see, I think that's a good start. I'm going to open up for some questions that you may have, and that will get us into.
That's great. I love how you did the visual too. I didn't feel that from you if this is my subject next time.
Absolutely. On the number of in the House of Bishops, so I said we have roughly about 800 who will be in the House of Deputies, lay and clergy. In the House of Bishops, there are about 300 bishops, both active and retired bishops, can all serve and have a voice and vote. Yes.
How long does the presiding bishop stay in office?
Oh, good question. For 9 years. So the presiding bishop serves 3 general conventions because we meet every 3 years. So Michael Curry, who was elected in 15, has one more round to serve, one more round, and then he will step down. And I should add, he's the first African American presiding bishop, and before him was the first woman presiding bishop, Catherine Jeffords Shorey, which was right after Bishop Robinson became the first openly gay bishop. So we did all these just great. Yes.
In my small groups, I've gotten to go to PYE and EYE both 2 times. And you get put in these small groups, okay? And so you would get put in a small group, and there's priests in your small group. One of my small groups, so it's 10-ish people, had Michael Curry in it. And another one of my small groups, that was the one when I was in high school, and then another one of my small groups had Bishop Robinson in it. So you meet the movers and shakers of our church. It's amazing.
So that was before Michael Curry was presiding.
That was what he was just a really powerful speaker.
That wasn't been so
Was he bishop?
No, he was not bishop of anything.
Oh,
When he
okay,
was in my
before.
small group, he was a priest.
Oh, okay, he was a priest. And became Bishop of North Carolina and served there for years.
Bishop Robinson was a bishop when he was in my small group, but Michael Curry was just a priest. Yeah.
So let me say a little bit about the contentious moments in our church and how we went through that. So the issues that are voted on at General Convention are matters of liturgy and music, of social policy, of budgeting, and church governance. So those are the issues brought forth for vote. And so a couple of contentious, and there's a free and open debate, as I mentioned, and then there's a vote. And we pride ourselves in the Episcopal Church for having order and being able to be very orderly, even when we disagree. Now, for the most part, we do that, although there have been moments when we've gotten a little raucous. And a couple of examples I'll give now of contentious moments. The ordination of women, which happened officially at the 1976 General Convention. That's when it was voted on. But some of you may know this, the first women priests were ordained 2 years prior to the 1976. So they jump-started that process. So it's called the Philadelphia 11. You may have heard that. 11 women who were ordained in Philadelphia. And they were ordained before it was voted on by General Convention. And at that ordination, I was told, I wasn't there, but there were men who literally screamed in opposition. Yeah.
They shouted them down.
Yeah, they were. So there's a part of, if you think of the wedding ceremony, it's a similar ceremony for ordination. There was an opportunity. You've heard in the wedding, if there's anyone here who feel this couple should not be married, speak now or forever hold his or her peace. So there was a part of the liturgy of ordination where the presiding bishop who was there, Frank Griswold was the presiding bishop, and I was, I'm going to talk about Gene Robinson in just a minute. This was before Frank Griswold. The presiding bishop at the time would then allow for opposition. And just as it was for Gene Robinson. And people can go down and express why they oppose this ordination. And it's really sad. Barbara Harris, who became the first woman bishop and elected in 1989, she talked about having to wear a bulletproof vest, or it's been said she had to wear a bulletproof vest because she got death threats, as did Gene Robinson. And some of his bodyguards were dressed as priests. And I was at that ordination, consecration in New Hampshire. So I wanted to be there.
Continued to wear bulletproof. I mean, Gene Robinson was dead.
Does he?
Certain public events.
Oh wow! And he's retired now, but he became the first openly gay bishop in Christendom. So any denomination. Barbara Harris was the first in the Episcopal Church, but the Methodist Church had ordained, had consecrated bishops before Barbara Harris. So let me say a little bit about that and then open up for more questions. So I went to New Hampshire, and I was there when Bishop Robinson, that historic moment. There were about 30-something bishops from across the country who were there as well. So other bishops who come and they're part of the laying on of hands, just as priests go through that part of the ceremony. And so when Bishop Griswold, the presiding bishop at the time, asked for if there were any people present who disagreed, there were 3 people who went down. There was a laywoman from New Hampshire, went down in opposition. There was I'll tell you why I'm laughing. A priest who went down, and I think he was from Pennsylvania. And then there was a bishop who opposed. The laywoman, she expressed her opposition, and it's not memorable, but the priest, what he said is memorable. He started by saying that I think it was 99% of gay men engage in oral sex, was what he said as an opposition. I know, and that was the look. It was this kind of gasp that went through the audit. We were in the hockey rink at New Hampshire. We were at the University of New Hampshire, so we were sitting in the hockey arena. And so there were all these people, and I remember whispering to my priest friend, and I said, and heterosexuals don't? and he said, I guess not. And so he then went on to give statistics about sex between men. And so finally, Bishop Griswold had as much as he could take, and he said, "Excuse me, Father, I don't understand what that has to do with why we've gathered today." And it was, yes, everybody was like, you could just, it was just like, thank God. And then we went, and so after that, the bishop came and opposed it, and we went right on with the ceremony. He was consecrated, ordained, and served for almost 10 years in the Diocese of New Hampshire as their bishop. And it was a great day. Yes?
Yeah, so is there a number of people that have to oppose for it not to go through, or just like extremely valid reasons?
Yeah, why
or, like,
did it have that in there? Just to note it?
It's noted. Because at that point, he's already been voted.
Yeah.
He's already been voted on at General Convention. And you care, for example, when marriage equality passed at General Convention, it passed overwhelmingly. Lay people had a higher vote. It was 3/4, almost 3/4 in the House of Bishops, and about 76% in the House of Deputies. So, and I must say, my former colleague Ruth Myers she was the chair of the liturgy. So that changed it. Will eventually go into the prayer book. Okay. All right, I'll just glean it. So the change to a prayer book, which we will change the language eventually, which has to go through 2 rounds of General Convention, because it's a change to the prayer book, and it will take man and woman and put 2 persons in the language of the prayer book. And so what her commission, she was chair of the Commission on Liturgy and Music, and they did a phenomenal job. I was telling Liz just the other day about, they met in restaurants, they talked, they did role plays, they heard both sides, they did studies, they brought in all kinds of data, and this went on for years before they finally put forth the resolution that passed, and it was a model leadership in what they did. And I remember when I heard it in my parish in Berkeley, I gave thanks for this commission, for this wonderful day in our church that was so organized and so well done and so compassionate, that it was a model. And there was a same-sex blessing, and some heterosexual couples use that because the language is so well thought out that heterosexual couples say, well, I prefer that as opposed to how it is in the prayer book. So they're working on the prayer book. The current prayer book was compiled in 1979. So we probably will have another prayer book, an updated one, soon.
We talked a little bit about the process and
Okay, yeah, and the other, so you've gotten all this.
yeah, no, he did that.
Oh, excellent. So we have a little bit more time. Other questions you might have for me? I know I've thrown a lot at you.
Was it possible, like, within a diocese or even just like one parish, for them to like initially make a decision, like we will ordain women or something before it was nationally set? Like, does that make
Yes,
sense?
that's what happened with the Philadelphia 11. They jumped General Convention. General Convention, it became official in 1976, but 1974, the first women were ordained. So they went ahead, which the Episcopal Church kind of frowned on that, but so many people felt, women and men, that the Episcopal Church was taking so long to move on this. And remember the time period it was going through. This is during the women's movement during that time, and so there was a lot happening in denominations across the board, and this was one way they felt women were not being treated fairly, as they were not, and they went ahead and the ordination, which pushed it to become official.
But the bishop who did that, didn't he get censured? Didn't he get
I don't know that.
So this is what I think happened, and I'll look it up to find out. But I think they there, and I'm not sure if that's the word, but he got censured for it. Because also there were priests that in our diocese, I know for sure, but in other dioceses that were marrying same-sex people before they were allowed, and so then they were grounded. However, that is for. But what it does is it forces
Or
this
to
issue
become
into
official.
a bigger. We're going to do this, and we're going to be, it's
As
kind
a
of an
matter
act
of
of
conscience.
civil disobedience.
As a matter of conscience, as a matter of the gospel of Jesus Christ that is inclusive, that I can no longer deny my sisters and brothers who from this part of the church to be full members in the church, who also are baptized members, and their baptismal covenant should be inclusive as others. And so that's been the argument. And I think because we pride ourselves in a sense of order, that's why that would really be frowned upon, because you didn't follow the process. We're big on process in the Episcopal Church.
But I think to be fair, I think it's like gay marriage happened during my realm, but like our priest Gray Temple was one of those who got grounded. He got grounded. He had to go up and think about what he'd done for a little bit. But he did it intentionally. He was one of a few priests who had done it with the intention to bring it up. So I think that helped, in my view, push like, hey, this is happening, and it's happening in different pockets.
Yes.
This is where we're moving, whether I agree or not, I'm gonna vote in a different way. I feel like, because it had started happening in different pockets. And when it happens in the South, I think it's notable. And it had happened in a few places in the South.
Well, I did as a gay priest, and my heterosexual priest friends, some of them chose not to do any weddings until all could get married. That was one way of opposing it. There's also something which some people want the civil part decoupled from the religious, and not be an agent of the state. Because there are some priests who argue I would be breaking the law.
Yeah.
And they felt like I am to uphold the law, and that's part of the church. And so they were put in this really, really difficult position of upholding a law that they did not agree with. So the civil and the religious. So there's an effort to have a civil marriage, and then you can have a ceremony that's separate, but it's not tied. Currently it's tied. You can have a great ceremony, and until I sign that license, you do not have over those 1,000 benefits. So it has to be a document that's signed. All right. Other things about governance, the ways we govern ourselves in the Episcopal Church.
Y'all excited to sign up for the youth part of it? I'm not kidding. I still put that on my resume. My resume has to say, please have that on there.
Well, it's good, to be involved with have a voice in the makings of the church. And I think that's what, as I said, so cool that you have that in the Episcopal Church. And of course, not all denominations have that. Well, the Roman Catholic, other churches, they have a strong democratic side, but not the hierarchical side. And so there are some values to the hierarchical side. For example, if a priest, a rector, is involved in sexual impropriety in the congregation, the bishop can pull that person out, and the bishop has the power to depose. We talk about deposing, which means you're stripped of your ordination. And unfortunately, that's happened here. So our diocese has been really healthy in that way about sexuality and appropriateness. But in a diocese this large, in the larger diocese, sometimes that happens. And so the bishop, that is the bishop's office, and that's the hierarchy at its best, I think, to make sure that people are not abused within the congregation. Oh, we're over. Okay. So that's a little bit about governance, and if you think of good questions, feel free to email me and ask. But you have this overview. This is the basic structure from congregation to diocese to the national church, international. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.